Hello, I'm Brian Wood, Technical Communications and Outreach Manager at Wolfram. I'm here today with Leo Laguna Ruiz, Software Engineer for Wolfram System Modeler. How are you today, Leo?
Hello, I'm fine. Everything's
Good,
going good.
excellent. Leo's going to talk a little bit about how he uses System Modeler to model analog audio synthesizers, which some musicians out there might recognize more colloquially as just a synth. So why don't we start off with just a little bit of background for anyone who may not be into music or may not really have heard of this before. What exactly do you mean when you say analog synthesizer?
Well, so in now we know that music and sound is produced by waves, right? So in the 70s or maybe probably 60s, the people started designing these new electric circuits in order to try to replicate the sounds. And the way they were approaching it was by creating the synthesizers, which I waveforms.
Right.
And combining all this, it was possible to generate sounds that in the beginning tried to imitate the existing sounds, but it ended up creating a whole new category of sounds that we never hear before. And all that equipment from the 70s and up to the 80s, it was an analog electronics.
Right. So that's so basically it's sending an electrical signal through and sort of just manipulating it to become something, something that's been altered and then creating a sound out of that. So I like the way you say that. Yeah, it's like an analog computer because you're sort of just it's you're not computing something explicitly. It's just that the electronics themselves are actually sort of doing those processes and manipulating it themselves. So where would most people have heard a synthesizer? I mean, what kinds of places would people might people recognize this from?
Yeah, I mean, probably nowadays, if you have listened any song released in the last 20 years, you have heard a synthesizer. But there are a few songs that have like a very recognizable synthesizer sound.
Hmm.
If, for example, just to come to my mind, Daft Punk, they use a lot of synthesizers
Yes.
or samples of synthesizers. So they produce electronic music, and mostly the sounds are synthesized. But yeah, nowadays I guess that every song has some part that is synthesized or that is processed using some kind of digital signal processing.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think that that's something a lot of people probably don't realize about the music that they hear is that a lot of those sounds are either entirely sort of made up, like they are not an actual
Eh,
sound that's made by hitting things together or anything like that, and the parts that aren't entirely made up are fairly heavily processed in a lot of cases.
yes,
So what tell us a little bit about what it is that you're doing with System Modeler in
right.
this scenario.
And one since many years back, I've been interested in music technology, and that same road led me to study electrical engineering, and that led me to start uh, to get interested in simulations and creating models. And that's how I ended up working in system modeler, because I really liked simulations and creating mathematical models.
Right.
And at some point, since music has always been like a passion for me, I started trying to combine these two things. Like, okay, I'm going to use the product that I'm developing to do something interesting, and at the same time, testing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So you're building these. You're essentially just modeling the circuits that make up an analog synthesizer. Is that right?
Right. So the one nice characteristic of the analog synthesizers is that I mean, here I'm comparing them with digital, purely digital versions. The analog synthesizers, since they're made with transistors, operational amplifiers, all these components are a bit imperfect, and that imperfection, it affects a lot the resulting sound. So if I make exactly the same, going back to the analogy of the analog computer versus a digital computer. So nowadays, if you want precision in your calculations, you will use a digital computer. You're not going to use an analog computer.
Right.
But in sound, it's a little bit different, because the analog computers had these imperfections that shape the sound, that changed how the sound worked, and it is more appealing for well, for musicians
Yeah.
and also people like me. So